I remember clearly the morning in 2008 when I accepted the invitation to join people in the former social hall after a service here. It was late August, and the sun was high in the sky as I made my way across the courtyard. Once inside, I accepted the other invitation, which was to take a yellow mug to identify myself as a newcomer. Then I took my own turn and made an invitation myself. "I see you also have a yellow mug," was the observation that I made. This led to a conversation during which we found out that we had both moved to Albuquerque earlier in the month and lived only about a mile from each other. On our way out, she mentioned that she had signed up for a covenant group and asked if I might sign up for the same one. I was on my way to making my first friend in Albuquerque. Many of you have a similar story of being at a particular place at a particular time and either extending or accepting an initial invitation that led to a new connection with someone. And each of us knows what not being invited or included feels like. What I'm interested in is everyday invitations as acts of kindness and social justice. Striking up a conversation with a newcomer in the social hall says, "I notice you. You matter." This puts our Unitarian principle of honoring the worth and dignity of all beings into practice. Offering a meal at Project Share, volunteering at an animal shelter, or tutoring children and teaching their parents English says, "I care, you belong." These and many other acts of invitation forward the UU principle of social justice. The act of inviting, however, does involve some risk. It is not guaranteed to go smoothly, no matter how well-intentioned. Your invitation to connect through a smile or introduction might be rejected or ignored. An offer of assistance to a disadvantaged group or person might be rejected. By initiating a conversation, you might be invited to share in another's pain or struggle. You might hear what you consider to be too much information. Admittedly, invitations are not without risk. Where do we find the nudge to make invitations when the results are so uncertain? On that first day in the social hall, I think it was both the recognition of another yellow mug and curiosity that encouraged my rather shy self to make an invitation. For me, it's curiosity and caring and a dose of courage that open the door to invitation. For you, it might be compassion for others or commitment to a cause, or something uniquely you that extends your arm out to connect with another. I return now to the benefits of making invitations. Invitations are acts of inclusion that make a person's day or change their life forever. Think about welcoming someone holding a yellow mug and asking them what brought him or her here. Think about inviting the odd coworker to lunch or to join in the lunchtime conversation. Think about acknowledging the person standing at the intersection holding a sign, even if you don't give them any money. Think of the many invitations that you make every day and see if they don't make a difference for you. Imagine then the difference they can make to other people.
I love to dance. You may not think that at first. I'm usually pretty quiet and sort of shy and reserved, though not nearly as much as I used to be. I used to be so shy that just being in the presence of strangers was enough to make me hunch my shoulders, hang my head, and try to disappear. I had somehow learned to be ashamed of my body, especially when it came to things like dancing in public, pretty early on. Even in kindergarten, at an age when a child shouldn't know the meaning of the term self-conscious, I cried when they tried to make me do the hokey pokey. Dancing at home was okay, but this was just too embarrassing. My feelings about the hokey pokey haven't changed much, by the way. But my feelings about dancing in public have. For some people, moving their bodies freely comes naturally. Some are raised in homes and communities where this is the norm. Others aren't. Still others are just natural introverts. For me, it was a combination of culture, family, and mostly personality that made me so uncomfortable in my own skin. I felt much more at ease with my nose in a book than I did on a dance floor. I had absorbed the messages I'd heard at school and in mainstream entertainment, which led me to believe I was too nerdy, too ugly, or even too white, despite being half Hispanic, to dance. White people can't dance was a stereotype I've heard more than once. And how often have we seen the brainy girl portrayed as clumsy rather than graceful? So I always thought that it was only other people who were allowed to dance or sing or what have you. And because I didn't use that type of physical expression, I felt somehow both inferior and superior to those who did. Oh well, they look dorky doing that anyway, I told myself. Only dumb people do that stuff. But I did feel the urge to dance to the music. And little by little, that urge grew stronger. Like me, most UUs tend to spend a lot of time in the realm of the mind and the intellect. And some of us aren't as comfortable expressing ourselves through our bodies. I admit, I'm not always so comfortable with the stand-up and clap portion of a Sunday service, but that's okay. Sometimes I don't feel like dancing either. I try not to feel bad about it when I'm just not in the mood, because I found that feeling guilty about being uncomfortable only makes me feel more awkward and uncomfortable. I believe that some of the discomfort a lot of people feel towards physical expression comes from inherited cultural and religious attitudes, even those we think we have discarded. For example, most of the Christian groups that settled in this country long ago tried to stifle the cultures of the other peoples they encountered, often banning their sacred dances. A few Protestant groups went as far as banning dancing and even music within their own communities in their attempt to separate themselves from their own sinful, usually meaning sexual, nature. To this day, many of the descendants of those repressed peoples still think of dancing as something other people do, not something they themselves would normally participate in, even if they aren't morally against it. They may think they're not allowed to, or tell themselves they don't want to anyway. Many actually admire the dancing of others and may watch the ceremonial dances of another culture with intellectual curiosity, but then feel embarrassed or amused at the idea of themselves or their own ancestors doing the same. But all of us are human, and dance is our birthright as human beings. My transformation from dance-phobic to dance-lover has been a fun, albeit frightening one. As a teenager, I tried some new and scary things, like drama class and even prom. In college, I took a yoga class, which was a major turning point in the process of removing my shackles of shame and allowing myself to enjoy my own physical being. Eventually, I got up my courage and decided to see what this dancing thing was all about. Since I was used to learning things in a formal, institutional setting, it was easiest for me to learn dancing in college classes. I never thought I'd find myself learning to belly dance. But there I was, in a room full of mirrors and strangers, trying not to look like an idiot. It was only after I had practiced some specific moves for a while that I began to feel comfortable enough to go out onto a dance floor and just wing it. After that, I expanded my dancing experience and greatly increased my confidence in another, less formal class taught by a member of the local pagan community. Because of that class, I've since found myself doing all sorts of things that would have been unimaginable to the old me, like belly dancing, scantily clad, in a public park in broad daylight in front of a crowd of people. I tell you, if I can do that, then anything is possible. I had discovered a side of myself I did not know existed. One of the sources of Unitarian Universalism is direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. Well, nothing renews my spirit or makes me appreciate life more than dancing. In dance, we humans find a balance between our godlike nature and our animal-like nature, a blend of the spiritual and the physical. Many religions have developed a dichotomy between the two, yet in dance, there often is no distance between them. Virtually all ancient cultures used some form of dance in their religious ceremonies. They knew something that we'd be wise to remember. Dancing is more than just fun. It's more than good exercise. It's good for the soul. Dancing makes me feel fully human and fully alive. When I'm dancing, I feel connected to the people around me, to the ancestors, to all of humanity, to all life, to the universe. That's another wonderful aspect of dance, the way it bonds communities together. I'll always remember one time when I feel I did directly experience that transcending mystery and wonder. I was in the middle of a large group of pagan folk, a live band drumming and chanting away on stage, nearly the entire audience on their feet, moving to the music. After a while, it truly felt like we were all parts of one body, each with our own style of moving, each an equally valid and valuable part of the whole. And believe me, there was some dancing going on that would be considered very strange to society at large. But no one was embarrassed, and no one was laughing at or judging anyone else. It was a rare moment of pure freedom. Many people don't like the idea of releasing themselves from the control of their conscious, rational minds, even temporarily. Maybe they're afraid they will do something stupid, or at the very least, look stupid. But I'll bet they didn't always feel that way. As kids, we instinctively knew how to dance. We knew it wasn't about looking cool or impressing anyone. It was simply about feeling the pure joy of being alive. Sometimes we forget this. We are taught that it is only for people who are good at it. In our culture of divided labor, the attitude of, I'll leave it to the professionals, is often applied even to artistic pursuits. But one thing I've learned while dancing in the pagan community is that sometimes the only wrong way to dance is to not dance at all. I'm not saying you should force yourself to if you're really not feeling it. What I am saying is, in those times when you do feel like it, but some voice tells you, you can't do that, or you'll make make a fool of yourself. Don't listen to it. If the Spirit is trying to move you, let yourself move. You may discover a side of yourself that you didn't know was there, and your body and spirit will thank you for it.
The ethic and theology of risk is built into the very DNA of our religious movement. The radical wing in England, as theologian James Luther Adams explains, rejected the notion that the cosmos is a hierarchy and that society must be organized on the patterns of hierarchy controlled by priest and monarch. Their way of doing church came to be known as congregational polity, which is really just two fancy words for how we govern ourselves. Along with Baptists and Congregationalists, we believe the best way to govern is to start on the congregational level, covenanted together locally. We rule ourselves. Then as a congregation, we voluntarily join another association. In our case, it's the Unitarian Universalist Association. So just think about this a little. The old way was hierarchy. Lay people obeying ordained clergy who reported to a bishop, who reported to an archbishop, etc., all the way up until the Pope, who I guess reported to God. Our messy version of church governance may produce disagreements and, from what I've heard, even full-blown arguments from time to time. But would we have it any other way? The risky way of doing church enables us to change quickly when we see the need to do so. The risky way of doing church allows us all to have a voice. We are not hierarchy, nor are we anarchy, though at times it may seem like it. We are coarchy. For a system that is hierarchical, the ultimate reality is absolute, perfectly stable, all-powerful, and all-knowing. A theology of control can take precedence here, which is the polar opposite of risk. Acting from control is unilateral. It doesn't hear the underbelly of society. If there is not a sure victory, people acting out of ethic of control will not even act. The problem may be too big and too systematic. Absolute power and control does not consult other communities. It just goes forward with its plans. If it cannot see a clear win, it often becomes paralyzed and cynical. But hey, we are bound to fail. Our knowledge is limited. We need to bring in multiple voices. We may not get there in our lifetime, and it may be messy, but generations will benefit from us having started. Operating from risk, we know that our sense of truth is partial, because we press on, and we know that our actions will inspire others. It involves an improbable task with unpredictable results. And our way of doing church knows that difference does not necessarily mean opposition. The ultimate reality, then, of risk, coarchy and congregational polity, is not absolute power, but possibility. The ultimate then is relative, relational, luring, and elusive. We know that one big win is unrealistic and that building a community based on openness and democracy is life-affirming. We can take courage from the community that is formed here, from the diverse opinions, and from the simple joy of working together. This type of risk involves what I call stepping out of yourself or stepping out of your comfort zone. The reward of taking this risk may make you feel like a speck of sand in a world of grand mountains. The reward is noticing how epic the sky is and how deep the canyon runs and how old the layers of volcanic rock are. We are rewarded with the depth of feeling connected to everything and everyone. I want to tell you a story that involved breaking out of my comfort zone and risk and stepping into something bigger than myself. I spent the summer of 2012 as an intern chaplain at an assisted living facility. After a few weeks, us interns were to choose the different wings we were to be responsible for. I asked to be put where the most help was needed and was put in charge of the memory care unit. Certain landmarks would signal that I was entering that unit. The odor of bleach springing up from the freshly mopped floors, the bad hallway art, which was, of course, faded over time. There was always one resident who would recite a nursery rhyme to me. Mary, Mary, quite contrary, how does your garden grow? With silver bells and cockle shells and pretty maids all in a row, as she pointed to the line of women in wheelchairs. I would chat with the RNs and the CNAs and see if there was a resident that needed a chaplain visit. I made it a point to introduce myself to everyone on that wing. Everyone except one. I could not even set foot in her room. I could only quickly pass by. Her name was Trudy. She was rather gaunt, frail, nonverbal, and completely bedridden. Quite honestly, she looked barely alive. I was told she was comatose. Why should I enter her room? There was nothing I had to offer. I could not help her. I brought up this dilemma to another chaplain who was a Roman Catholic priest, and he said, what you need to do is just go in there and pray for her. My response was, I just don't do that sort of thing. I'm a Unitarian Universalist. I needed to pray in my own way. After a few days, or maybe even weeks, I went to my chaplain supervisor with feelings of guilt, and I confessed that I had been avoiding a resident. My supervisor reminded me that hearing is oftentimes one of the last things to go. She told me to read her medical chart, call her relatives, ask the nurses and any other caregivers questions to find out what the resident likes. The next day, I was in the nurse's station, prayerfully reading up on Trudy and asking questions. I found out that the woman I was avoiding used to love to dance to the music of Frank Sinatra. She was a widow and had only distant relatives that lived far away. She was rarely visited, if at all. Then a woman came in the nurse's station carrying a black case. I introduced myself and asked what it is that you have in your case there. She said it was an auto harp, and she was a music therapist. Being interested in music, I asked if I could shadow her some next time on her next visit, and she said, sure. As it turns out, she was going to visit the woman that I had been avoiding. We entered Trudy's room together, and I saw a color photograph of Trudy dancing cheek to cheek with her husband. The music therapist sang and played, and suddenly the woman grunted ever so softly. Someone everyone thought was comatose suddenly wasn't. The therapist said sometimes music really brings out Trudy. So the very next day, I came in and sang, "My kind of town, Chicago is." I heard a small grunt, followed by a louder one. I told her I was going to put my hand close to hers and that if she liked, she could hold it. She clenched 3 of my fingers. I wanted her to imagine we were dancing. I asked her to squeeze my hand if she liked the song I sang, and she gently squeezed. I asked her if she wanted me to sing another, squeeze again, and she squeezed. And then, with my hand in hers, I sang, "All of me, why not take all of me?" I ended up singing to Trudy once a week and asked other chaplains to sing to her as well. For me, it was a transition from acting out of an ethic and theology of control to an ethic and theology of risk. We have many risks this time of year. Perhaps we're pledging for the first time. Perhaps pledging is a risk. And with the Jewish high holy days, perhaps the risk of forgiving others and ourselves is in the air. Our theology of risk is built into who we are as Unitarian Universalists. And it comes from ought and from love. We have a vision of how the world ought to be. The work to get there is life-affirming and meaningful because we are connected to others, contributing to others, and loving others into that ought. Risk might be a seemingly simple invitation. Risk may make a shy person become a belly dancer. And risk, not control, that's what allowed me to sing and dance with a woman who everyone thought was comatose. May we all risk the adventure, embrace the invitations, the dances, and the Trudys of our lives. Amen, and blessed be. Please rise in body and or spirit and sing with me our closing hymn, verses 1 and 2 of hymn number 311, Let It Be a Dance.